I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
In Florida, having a pot pipe is a felony, but illegally pushing millions of Oxycontin is a fine. Florida has this massive problem with what's called the Oxycontin Express. The state is home to more pill mills where addicts get their hillbilly heroin than any other. Walgreens, the national pharmacy chain, has been under DEA investigation for distribution of millions of Oxycontin sales where thousands of sales should have been expected. Yet the drug Florida's legislature can't stop trying to control isn't Oxycontin, it's cannabis. Florida Governor Rick Scott signed into law the bong ban bill this weekend. Under this statute, someone caught owning or selling a pot pipe twice in the state is a felon, which in Florida means losing the right to vote virtually for life. Drug convicts must wait 7 years after the fulfillment of all prison, probation, and parole to apply to a clemency board to consider restoring their voting rights in the state of Florida. This has meant 10% of all voting age Floridians and a shocking 23% of African American Floridians cannot vote. Note to bitter Democrats, those votes would have given us President Gore in 2000. Now, this law is fairly toothless at the retail level. You can still sell a corncob pipe for any purpose. You can still sell hookahs. And you can still sell any pipe so long as it is for tobacco use only. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Know what I mean? Know what I mean? Oh, and as long as 75% of your sales are tobacco related. But at the consumer level, if you're caught with a used marijuana pipe, it's got to be hard to argue that it was for tobacco use only. You'll get a first-degree misdemeanor and face 1 year in prison the first time you're caught with a pot pipe, and a third-degree felony and face 5 years in prison if you're caught again. Now, as the former crack addict turned representative who sponsored the bill explained, quote, rather than just regulating them, let's just ban them. If we can make people drive to Georgia and Alabama and South Carolina to get fireworks, they can drive to get these utensils of death, end quote. And all but 5 of his colleagues, a 31-2 vote in the Senate and a 112-3 vote in the House, agreed with them. And Florida legislators have repeatedly rejected the Kathy Jordan Medical Marijuana Act, named after the Florida woman who has survived over 2.5 decades with Lou Gehrig's disease after being given 2 years to live, thanks to her use of medical cannabis. The act has not even been debated in the Florida legislature. Manatee County sheriffs even raided Kathy's medical grow the day after the bill was published, with her name and address in the public record, giving them the location to search. To their credit, the Jordans refused a plea deal, as Kathy's husband Bob told Normal, quote, if I could handle Vietnam, I could take whatever the state wants to try and hit me with. I am protecting my wife. No deals, no nothing. I want a trial. I want a jury to see my wife and try to convict her, end quote. The state's attorney decided to drop the charges against her, recognizing an obvious precedent-setting case of medical necessity that he didn't want to have on the Florida books. Meanwhile, the DEA has just settled with Walgreens over the Oxycontin distribution investigation. The pharmacy giant will pay an $80 million fine, and its Jupiter, Florida distribution plant and 6 Florida pharmacies will be banned from distributing Schedule 2, 3, 4, and 5 drugs for the next 6 months. The fine and settlement is expected to cost the giant corporation between 4 and 6 cents a share. $80 million fine for a corporation with quarterly cash flow at about $1.2 billion and quarterly sales of $18.65 billion. That works out to about 0.42% of Walgreens' quarterly sales. A 0.42% fine for a corporation that had one store in Oviedo go from ordering, about 80,000 Oxycontins to about 1.7 million between 2009 and 2011. It had a store in Hudson that went from 388,000 Oxycontins in 2009 to 2.1 million in 2011, and a store in Fort Myers, Florida that went from 95,000 Oxycontins in 2009 to 2.2 million Oxycontin. Now, to try to put this in perspective, imagine the DEA caught an average American with a $45,000 annual income diverting millions of Oxycontin on the black market, and then settled with that American for a $47.25 fine and no criminal charges. Yeah, right. USA Today reports that Miami Field District Special Agent in Charge, Mark Trowville, said, quote, Walgreens pharmacists blatantly ignored red flags. National pharmaceutical chains are not exempt from following the law, end quote. Yeah, but national pharmaceutical chains' corporate officers tasked with following the law don't do any jail time or lose their right to vote. However, a medical marijuana patient in Florida caught with 21 grams of marijuana will face 5 years in prison and never vote again. The DEA, by the way, is playing Walgreens for a sucker. They knew all along that Florida's Oxycontin Express was fueling the entire Eastern hillbilly heroin market because they were greenlighting it. As Alternet reported back in 2011, the DEA has an Office of Diversion Control that must approve the manufacture of Oxycontin. Companies must submit requests, and then the office sets quotas on how much can be produced. Here's a quote from the Alternet piece. In 1997, a year after prescription drug maker Purdue Pharma first bought Oxycontin, the first branded version of oxycodone, the total production quota approved by the Office of Diversion Control was 8.3 tons. By 2011, it had risen to 105 tons, an officially sanctioned 1,200% increase. That's right. During the span of the medical marijuana era, 1997 to 2011, while they're trying to shut down every dispensary they possibly can, the DEA allowed Big Pharma to manufacture 1,200% more oxycodone. Now, Alternet's reporter then asked DEA Supervisory Special Agent Gary Boggs why the agency had greenlit a 1,200% increase in oxycodone manufacturing. Boggs's response is literally incredible. Quote, what you have to understand is that you do have legitimate patients, and they're fishing from the same pond that the illegitimate patients are fishing from. So you have to be cautious not to restrict the quota to the point that when the legitimate parties go to the pool, all the fish haven't been taken out by the illegitimate parties. Quote. Try and imagine Eddie Lepp serving 10 years in a federal prison for medical marijuana cultivation in California, explaining that he needed to grow tens of thousands of medical marijuana plants in California so that the legitimate patients would have a supply after all the potheads got theirs. Don't think that would fly with the DEA. But when it comes to Oxycontin, we have to produce a shit ton of it so that after all the pillheads get theirs, the legitimate patients will still have some. That's the DEA's excuse. Continuing from Alternet, Boggs acknowledged the limitations of the metaphor, but added, quote, we can't just be arbitrary and capricious in cutting the quota supply because we have a diversion problem, end quote. Arbitrary and capricious? Yeah, the DEA can be completely arbitrary and capricious. Those were the words of its own administrative law judge, Francis L. Young, in 1988, when he ruled the DEA was being arbitrary and capricious in denying the medical utility and accepted safety in the use of the cannabis plant. So We can't be arbitrary and capricious with respect to Big Pharma's drug, but Mother Nature's drug, all the arbitrariness and capriciosity you want can be thrown at that. I don't know if capriciosity is a word, but we're going with it. Concluding from the alternate piece, the fact is that the U.S. government has adopted a position on prescription painkillers that differs from its policy toward other controlled substances such as cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. Unlike those drugs, the DEA says limiting the supply of prescription painkillers will not reduce abuse. Yeah, because cocaine, heroin, and marijuana don't have lobbyists on Capitol Hill. It's all about the power of corporate lobbying. That's how a drug like Oxycodone, a synthetic form of heroin, gets special treatment, despite being the #1 gateway drug to heart abuse. That's how Florida's statewide prescription drug monitoring database, a system similar to those implemented in 34 other states, suffers defunding threats from its governor. The biggest irony in this whole story is that allowing patients to use medical marijuana eliminates most of the need for the oxycodone. A 2011 survey of the Berkeley Patients Group, a medical marijuana collective in California, found that 2/3 of its patients substituted cannabis for prescription drugs, and, quote, those with pain symptoms said that marijuana has less addiction potential than do opioids, and others said marijuana helped to reduce the dose of other medications, end quote. And a 2004 study at Virginia Commonwealth University found, quote, a search for a better analgesic strategy led to the discovery that delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, the major psychoactive constituent of marijuana, enhances the potency of opioids such as morphine in animal models, end quote. It's all about the money, people. They don't want medical marijuana to proliferate and take away the cash cow that is the oxycodone prescriptions that are funding these big pharmaceutical companies, getting their customers hooked and forcing them to keep coming back, paying more and more for their pain when there is a natural, safe, herbal alternative they can grow in their own damn backyards. The Tall Brothers said it best. Simply business. It's all about the business. That's all the time we got here for the Russ Belville Show, Hour 1. But stick with us as we go into Toker Talk Radio, Hour 2, where we'll take your calls at 971-533-7111. Got plenty to talk about. I'm going to rant a little bit more on a couple of those stories we covered today. I got to talk about this stupid Supreme Court decision. I can't believe it. They've made it even worse than it could have been. And more stories. So stick around. For Brian the Red, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, take care of each other, tokers.